Welcome back to the deep dive. We're really thrilled to have you with us today.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
So I want you to just picture something for a second. Think back to those years you spent in a classroom,
Oh boy.
right? Staring at a whiteboard, being handed these incredibly dense, complicated lists of vocabulary words.
The endless flashcards.
Exactly. And you were likely taught that to sound truly intelligent, like to command respect in a boardroom or just be taken seriously in the world, you needed to deploy the most complex linguistic structures possible.
Yeah, that's the standard model.
We've all been conditioned by academia to believe that complexity automatically equals competence. But what if that very assumption, specifically when it comes to the physical act of speaking, is actually the primary obstacle ruining your ability to communicate?
It's a massive systemic paradox, really. I mean,
Hmm.
we spend years trying to build these massive labyrinthine structures of language in our heads. We treat casual conversation like it's an academic paper we have to read aloud.
Right, like we're defending a thesis at a coffee shop.
Exactly. And then we find out that when we actually engage in spontaneous dialogue, those structures just collapse under their own weight.
They totally do.
The source material we're examining today strikes right at the heart of this friction.
Hmm.
The friction between how we're taught to speak and how human beings actually connect.
Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're pulling from an excerpted transcript of a live broadcast by A.J. Hoke.
Right, the effortless English guy.
Yeah, the creator of the effortless English system, which is a methodology that has reached tens of millions of learners globally. I think they claim over 40 million students.
It's a massive, massive sample size.
It really is. So we aren't looking at some localized niche theory here. We are analyzing a framework tested on a huge scale, dealing with the real-world frustrations of people just trying to make themselves understood.
Yeah, everyday people.
And the mission for this deep dive is to extract the mechanics of effective communication. We want to strip away all that academic noise and look at the underlying psychology. We're exploring a core theme today, which is basically the battle between the ego and connection.
And framing it as ego versus connection is vital here.
Yeah.
Because when we analyze this text, we're moving way past a simple linguistic review.
Yeah.
We're entering a structural analysis of spoken language. It forces you to ask a really fundamental question.
Which is?
Are you speaking to transfer a clear message? Or are you speaking to prove your own intellectual worth?
Oh, wow.
Right? The text argues that those two goals are almost always mutually exclusive in real-time conversation.
You literally can't do both at the same time.
Exactly.
So the source kicks things off by deconstructing the ultimate goal of speaking. It lays out this progression of communication, starting from the baseline and moving up to complex human interactions.
It's highly methodical. It begins at the basic level.
Purely transactional stuff.
Right. You're at a transit hub, you need to purchase a ticket, and you successfully complete the transaction. The stakes are low, the parameters are fixed. Your primary objective is just fulfilling a tangible, immediate need.
I need a coffee, where's the bathroom, that sort of thing.
Exactly.
But then we graduate to the intermediate level.
Which is much harder.
Yeah, this is where you actually want to have a meaningful conversation. You want the person across from you to listen, to engage, maybe even form a personal attachment. The source specifically mentions the dynamic of getting a date.
Fostering mutual attraction.
Right. Now we're no longer just exchanging data. Emotion and subjective social dynamics are driving the interaction.
And the complexity of the interaction multiplies exponentially there.
Because it's not just about facts anymore.
Right, because the desired outcome relies entirely on the other person's subjective processing of your persona. Do they like you? Do they trust you?
Yeah.
Then the text scales up to the advanced level. These persuasion, high-stakes sales presentations, intense job interviews.
Where you're actively trying to influence behavior.
Exactly. Convincing a hiring manager to trust you with their company's resources. Or getting a client to buy into your vision.
And here is the core thesis of the text that completely upends the traditional academic model. The absolute best way to achieve results at all of these levels.
All of them.
Whether you're ordering a coffee or trying to close a massive corporate acquisition, the best way is by being simple, direct, clear, and confident.
Yeah.
The text literally describes complex English as noise. It categorizes it as a failure of communication.
What's fascinating here is how characterizing complexity as noise challenges so many of our internalized biases.
We really do think big words mean smart people.
We inherently conflate a dense vocabulary with high competence. But if we look at cognitive load theory, deciphering long, convoluted sentences actually fractures the listener's focus.
It exhausts
The
them.
source paints a picture of a modern environment that's already saturated with noise. When a speaker tries to perform their intelligence by using excessively layered sentences and obscure terminology,
They aren't clarifying their point at all.
no, they're demanding that the listener expend vital cognitive energy just to decode the packaging of the message.
Yeah, it's like wrapping a tiny gift in 50 layers of duct tape.
Perfect analogy.
And the source illustrates this with a brilliant contrast. It's the tale of two communicators. First, we get this anecdote about an advanced English class at a premier university in Thailand.
Right, the Thai professor.
Yeah, so the professor at the front of the room is explaining concepts that are, at their core, fairly straightforward. But his delivery mechanism is a complete disaster.
The textual description of that classroom is a perfect study in ego-driven communication.
Oh, absolutely.
The professor was constructing incredibly long, multi-clause sentences. He was deliberately selecting the most archaic, least common vocabulary available.
Just to show off.
It was as if the primary goal of the lecture was to justify his own tenure, rather than to actually educate the students in front of him.
And the result was entirely predictable. Half the class was visibly struggling to decode the syntax.
And the other half?
The other half had simply checked out. They were physically falling asleep, exhausted by the mental gymnastics required just to listen.
Right.
The ideas weren't the barrier. His ego-driven English was the barrier.
That is the academic trap in action. Academia inherently rewards the performance of intellect.
We get graded on it.
Exactly. We are conditioned to believe that advanced grammar is the primary metric of intelligence. But when you map that artificial metric onto real-time, spontaneous human interaction, the system inevitably breaks down.
It just doesn't work.
The speaker works so hard to project superiority that they completely alienate the receiver. And more dangerously, this conditions learners to experience crushing anxiety.
Oh, the anxiety is real.
They enter a real-world conversation, they hit a slight speed bump, and suddenly they freeze because they cannot instantly recall that impressive 5-syllable word they memorized for a test.
It's entirely an ego trap. Now look at the counterexample provided in the text. There's an American language teacher named Blaine Ray. The source describes attending one of his seminars, and the audience was this highly diverse international mix of native and non-native speakers. Ray was breaking down pedagogical methodologies.
Which is arguably much denser material than whatever that Thai professor was discussing.
Way denser. But his linguistic strategy was the exact inverse. He relied almost entirely on short, active voice sentences.
Common vocabulary.
High-frequency, everyday vocabulary. And he modulated his pace to be deliberate and direct.
And the consensus from that extremely diverse audience was unanimous.
Everyone agreed he was a master communicator, native speakers and non-native speakers alike.
He didn't need convoluted phrasing to prove his expertise. His brilliance was entirely located in his clarity.
I really want you, the listener, to run this through your own experiential filter right now. Think about a recent corporate meeting or a specialized lecture you've attended.
We've all been there.
How often have you sat there while someone deployed an absolute arsenal of industry jargon to describe a fundamentally basic concept?
Leaving you completely unmoored.
Totally lost. And then, a colleague translates it into plain language later, and you realize the concept wasn't difficult at all. The initial speaker was just guarding it behind a wall of complexity.
Recognizing that dynamic is incredibly liberating for a learner. The source text explicitly frames this as a massive relief.
A huge weight off your shoulders.
It gives you permission to stop obsessing over rapid-fire delivery. It removes the mandate to flawlessly execute the most obscure grammatical tenses in casual conversation. The pressure to constantly perform linguistic mastery is actively detrimental to the actual goal, which is connection.
It is liberating, but it immediately provokes a structural question, right?
Yeah.
If our primary mandate for speaking is to remain simple, clear, and direct, does that render advanced vocabulary obsolete? Do we just abandon the pursuit of complex language entirely and speak like toddlers?
Not at all. And the text anticipates this. It pivots to the one specific domain where complexity remains absolutely non-negotiable.
Right. It addresses a challenge raised by a live viewer named Aldabase. This viewer points out that their professional environment demands a comprehension of high-level specialized terminology. They have to know the big words for work.
And the source fully concedes this point, establishing a really crucial dichotomy. While output speaking must remain simple, input specifically listening is the domain where rapid processing speed and a vast reservoir of complex vocabulary are absolutely essential.
This requires us to look at the neurological mechanics of active versus passive vocabulary.
Yeah, let's break that down.
When the text advocates for simplicity, it is strictly referring to your active vocabulary.
The words you actually say.
Right. Those are the words you can summon from your neural pathways instantly, overriding the stress of a live interaction and physically articulate in a fraction of a second.
Conversely, your passive vocabulary encompasses the vast catalog of words you may never organically use in your own speech, but you instantly recognize and decode them when you encounter them externally.
Like reading a novel.
Exactly. The critical insight here is that building a massive passive vocabulary requires a fundamentally different and arguably much lower threshold of cognitive effort than building an active one.
But why is that? If recognition requires less effort, why is that the case biologically? Why do we spend so much time running flashcards trying to force active recall if recognition is the more efficient pathway?
It comes down to how the brain retrieves data. Recall the active process is highly demanding.
Because you're starting from scratch.
Right. You have to locate a specific abstract concept, translate it into the target language, map the phonetic output, and execute the motor functions of speech. And you're doing all of this while actively managing the social variables of the conversation.
While looking them in the eye and trying not to spill your coffee.
Exactly. It's an immense cognitive load. Recognition, however, is a triggered response. When you hear a complex word, the surrounding contextual clues of the sentence, combined with the acoustic signature of the word itself, instantly fire the established neural association.
The external stimulus does the heavy lifting for you.
Precisely. The cue is provided for you.
That structural difference really explains why listening is frequently cited as the most brutal phase of language acquisition.
Oh, absolutely.
Because when you're speaking, you are the architect of the conversation. You dictate the pace, you select the phrasing, you steer around your own knowledge gaps.
You don't know a word, you just describe around it.
Right. But the moment you switch to listening, you surrender all control. The native speaker across from you might speak at double speed. They might lean heavily on hyper-regional idioms. Or they might simply have a tendency to mumble.
And that complete lack of control is precisely why a robust passive vocabulary is your only defense mechanism.
You have to be ready for anything they throw at you.
The source proposes a highly specific dual input strategy to build this passive database.
Which I loved.
Yeah, the simultaneous consumption of audiobooks and physical texts. By reading the printed word while concurrently processing a native speaker's natural cadence and pronunciation, you are forcefully linking visual recognition with auditory processing speed.
You're training the brain to decode complexity in real time.
Exactly.
The functional relief this offers you is enormous. You are not required to speak like a walking dictionary.
Yeah.
You merely have to possess the capacity to understand one. You have the freedom to be the Blaine Ray of your environment, deploying clear, simple, effective language while maintaining the deep passive database necessary to comprehend the Thai professors of the world when they begin to pontificate.
And we can extrapolate that dual input strategy to modern media consumption too.
Like watching Netflix.
Right. Engaging with television or cinema in a target language is essentially immersion therapy for passive acquisition. Scripted dialogue, especially in fast-paced dramas or comedies, strips away the pedagogical training wheels.
It's not the slow, robotic voice from an audio lesson.
No, it subjects your auditory processing to the unfiltered, chaotic reality of native cadence. It forces the ear to acclimate to slurred boundaries between words and rapid slang, and it builds that recognition muscle without the immediate physiological pressure of having to formulate a response.
You can just sit back and absorb.
Exactly.
So if we accept that speaking should be simple, and we acknowledge that listening requires a massive passive database, what's the next variable in the equation?
Because words alone aren't enough.
Right. If the vocabulary is in place, what determines the clarity of the signal? The source text moves directly into the physical mechanics of sound. It addresses the pronunciation paradigm and the often debated concept of standard accents.
This transition is prompted by a viewer named Jean. Jean identifies the specific physical difficulty of mastering foreign vowel sounds.
Vowels are tough.
Very. The source's response establishes a clear hierarchy here. Once simple phrasing is achieved, pronunciation is the definitive next hurdle, because returning to the core thesis, communication must be clear. and clarity is entirely dependent on phonetic accuracy.
And here, the source wades into a territory that frequently triggers a lot of defensiveness, the impact of native accents.
It's a sensitive topic.
Very sensitive. But the host of the broadcast immediately establishes a critical baseline. Possessing a strong native accent, whether your phonetic interference is rooted in Romance languages, Japonic languages, Slavic languages, whatever, is not a reflection of your character or your intelligence.
Of course not.
However, from a purely functional standpoint, extreme phonetic deviation heavily restricts the global footprint of your communication.
We really have to view this through the lens of acoustic compatibility rather than cultural identity.
Right.
The text provides a compelling hypothetical. If a speaker whose mother tongue dictates a specific, rigid vowel placement attempts to speak English, a listener from that same linguistic background will likely experience zero friction.
Because their brains share the same phonetic expectations, they're tuned to the same static.
Exactly. Even a listener who's just deeply familiar with that specific interference might easily bridge the gap. But if that heavily accented speaker attempts to interface with a listener from a completely disparate linguistic background,
Pre-interaction often collapses.
it collapses. The acoustic deviations from the expected phones are simply too vast for the listener's brain to autocorrect in real time.
This friction is perfectly articulated by a viewer named John Ron, tuning in from Finland. He asks a highly self-aware question. He says, is it inherently bad to deliberately adopt an American accent?
He's worried about sounding fake.
Yeah, is there a risk of sounding inauthentic? Or as if he's mocking the culture by abandoning his natural Finnish cadence?
And the source shuts that anxiety down immediately.
Enthusiastically.
The directive is an enthusiastic endorsement to optimize your accent as closely as possible to a standard model, be it American, British, or Australian.
Which introduces the utility of standard accents, specifically standard North American or BBC English.
And it is vital to detach this from any notion of cultural imperialism or superiority.
It's not about one culture being better.
Not at all. The dominance of these specific phonetic models is entirely a byproduct of global media infrastructure. Decades of international film distribution, global news syndication, ubiquitous pop music, they have established these specific cadences as the baseline acoustic settings for the planet.
Here's where it gets really interesting. When we strip away all that cultural baggage, attempting to soften your native interference isn't an act of erasing your heritage. It is a calculated optimization strategy.
It's pure mechanics.
You are deliberately tuning your transmission to a universal frequency to ensure your signal is decoded by the maximum number of receivers. It's about efficiency, not identity.
It's an issue of cognitive empathy for your listener. You're making it easier for them to understand you. And the psychological framework the source recommends for this process is fascinating.
It's so fun, actually.
It advises against treating pronunciation as a rigid, high-stakes academic exercise. Instead, it suggests gamifying the process. Treat it as an acting exercise. Adopt a persona.
The directive is to really lean into the exaggeration. If you're targeting a standard North American sound, be overtly theatrically American in your private practice.
Pretend you're a movie star.
Yeah. The text touches on a methodology known as the shadowing technique to facilitate this. Shadowing requires listening to a native audio source and immediately vocalizing the exact phonetic sequence. You echo the pitch, the micropauses, the intonation, acting as a simultaneous vocal shadow.
The underlying mechanics of shadowing are profound. You are attempting to override deeply entrenched muscle memory.
Physical muscles.
Right. The physical muscles of your jaw, your tongue, your vocal cords, they've been conditioned since infancy to hit specific positions based on your mother tongue.
They're locked in.
Shadowing forces those muscles to map new neuromotor pathways. And by framing it as an acting game, you bypass Stephen Krashen's concept of the affective filter.
What's the affective filter again?
It's the psychological barrier of embarrassment or self-consciousness.
Yeah.
It spikes when we attempt unfamiliar, silly sounds. But if you're acting, you aren't failing to speak perfectly. You're just playing a character.
It takes all the pressure off. But here is the critical pivot in the text. You can master the passive vocabulary. You can run shadowing drills until your jaw literally aches. You can perfect the standard accent. But what happens when you step into a room, open your mouth, and absolutely freeze?
The system crashes.
The system completely crashes. This brings us to what I find to be the most revealing segment of the entire deep dive, the emotional anatomy of fluency.
This is where the source completely departs from linguistics and enters the realm of neurobiology.
It's wild.
It presents a paradigm-shifting case study. A viewer writes in, describing a debilitating tendency to hesitate and stutter when interacting with strangers.
And what's the twist?
The revelation is that this viewer is a native English speaker.
Native.
English is their primary language,
Yeah.
possessed since birth. They also speak Arabic, but English is their mother tongue.
That completely upends the traditional model. We inherently assume that hesitation is a symptom of a vocabulary deficit. I don't know the word, so I stutter. But observing a native speaker suffer from the exact same paralysis forces us to isolate the variables.
The source diagnoses this instantly. This is not a failure of language. It is a crisis of the nervous system.
By isolating linguistic competence as a non-factor, we're forced to look at the physiology of anxiety.
When an individual is required to speak to a stranger, or when they're placed in a high-stakes, evaluative environment like a job interview, where they're asked a fundamentally simple question like, why do you want to work here? The brain often miscategorizes the social pressure as a literal survival threat.
The classic fight-or-flight mechanism.
Exactly. The amygdala perceives a threat and triggers a systemic response. Cortisol and adrenaline flood the bloodstream. Your
Yeah.
heart rate elevates.
You start sweating.
Right. And crucially, blood flow and metabolic resources are actively diverted away from the prefrontal cortex.
Which does what?
That's the region responsible for executive function, complex reasoning, and language retrieval.
Oh, wow.
The energy is redirected toward the muscular system. Your biological hardware is preparing you to physically fight or sprint away. It is not preparing you to conjugate verbs.
So the mental block isn't a lack of knowledge. It is a temporary stress-induced cognitive shutdown.
Precisely.
Understanding that biological reality makes the source's critique of standardized testing so compelling. We hear from a viewer named Hindi. Hindi writes in describing the crushing anxiety caused by the speaking section of the TOEFL exam.
Pressure cooker.
It really is.
Yeah.
You're given a random prompt, a microphone, and exactly 45 seconds on a ticking visual timer to record a coherent response.
The text aggressively dismantles the validity of that testing model. It labels it artificial and ridiculous. And viewing it through the lens of neurobiology, the host is absolutely right.
It's a terrible metric.
That environment does not test conversational fluency. It tests an individual's autonomic nervous system's ability to suppress a cortisol spike under synthetic, highly unnatural time constraints.
Even hyper-articulate native speaker, if they possess a naturally anxious disposition, would likely trigger a freeze response staring at a 45-second countdown. The timer induces the panic takes the prefrontal cortex offline, the speaker stumbles, and the test records a failure.
A metric that has zero correlation with their actual ability to connect in a real-world dialogue.
Zero. So, if the failure point is biological rather than linguistic, how do we intervene? How do we fix it? The text provides a fascinating protocol of physical biofeedback to hack the emotional state.
This is where the application becomes incredibly practical.
Yes.
The source dictates that to neutralize the internal cognitive panic, you must manipulate the external physical structure.
You have to change your body.
Adjust your posture. Pull your shoulders back and down.
Yeah.
Elevate your chin. Establish deliberate eye contact. And consciously drop your vocal register to a lower resonant tone.
This is essentially reverse engineering the nervous system.
Exactly. The brain constantly monitors the physical body for cues about the environment. By physically embodying the markers of dominance and security, taking up space, expanding the chest, utilizing a grounded vocal resonance, you are sending a feedback loop to the amygdala, stating that the environment is safe.
We're not being chased by a lion, calm down.
Right. And as you hold that posture, the adrenaline response degrades. The prefrontal cortex comes back online, and the localized language centers unlock. The fluency doesn't magically appear. It was always there. You just had to signal your biology to release it.
And I want to point out to you that this protocol is universally applicable. This is not just a language learning hack.
No, it works for everything.
Whether you're attempting a second language with a native speaker, delivering a critical quarterly breakdown to your executive board, or just giving a toast at a crowded wedding, when you feel that cognitive freeze approaching, do not frantically search your memory for vocabulary. Stop. Command your physical posture. Drop your shoulders, ground your stance, lower your pitch. When the body signals safety, the language will flow.
It shifts the burden of communication from mental exertion to physical presence. However, managing the biological stress response is only one facet of the anxiety.
True.
The text introduces a fascinating comparative analysis, contrasting the visceral panic of speaking with the deceptive comfort of writing.
Yeah, we are introduced to a viewer named Karema. Karema highlights a very common disparity. They can write fluidly, but they experience total paralysis when attempting to speak.
And the source frames this not as a failure, but as a good problem.
Why is it a good problem?
The logic is sound. If an individual can generate coherent written text, it provides empirical proof that the foundational linguistic software is fully installed. The grammar and vocabulary exist in the brain. The friction is entirely located in the real-time processing demands of the vocal hardware.
It's an output issue, not a data issue.
Mm.
This segues perfectly into a comment from a viewer named Ariba Fatima. She articulates the ultimate fear that silences so many individuals. She expresses a paralyzing terror of making real-time errors with helping verbs.
Am, is, are, do, does.
Right. This anxiety over grammatical perfection is the ultimate manifestation of the ego-disrupting connection. She's so worried about being perfectly correct that she's afraid to speak at all.
And the source responds to this fear by dropping a massive, open secret of the linguistic world.
I love this part.
Native speakers systematically and continuously violate the rules of grammar when speaking. It is a constant feature of natural dialogue.
We do it all day long.
To contextualize why this happens, we must dissect the inherent differences between the mediums of writing and speaking. Writing is a permanent artifact.
It sits there on the page.
It exists statically, inviting prolonged scrutiny and analysis. Because of its permanence, the architectural rules of writing are rigid. A structural error in text can alter meaning or immediately degrade the author's perceived authority, specifically because the reader has the luxury of time to dissect it.
You can read it over and over.
Speaking, however, is a kinetic, ephemeral event. The audio waves exist for a millisecond and vanish.
Sure, Con.
Due to its impermanence, spoken language is inherently casual, highly malleable, and deeply forgiving.
The text catalogs the routine mistakes that native speakers execute daily without a second thought. For instance, adjectives are constantly substituted for adverbs. A native speaker will instinctively say, "I speak fast," entirely bypassing the grammatically mandated "I speak quickly."
Nobody says, "I speak quickly" in casual conversation.
We communicate in fractured, incomplete clauses. We pivot topics mid-sentence, leaving the original thought structurally abandoned. We routinely omit helping verbs entirely, relying purely on inflection. Like instead of "Are you going to the store?" we just say "You going to the store."
And the critical takeaway is that in the theater of live interaction, rigid grammatical adherence is completely subordinated to the primary directive, the transfer of meaning.
Did they understand you? That's all that matters.
If the acoustic and contextual cues successfully convey the inquiry about the store, the structural absence of the auxiliary verb are is functionally irrelevant to the listener. They don't even notice it's missing.
The source also applies a cultural lens to this dynamic. It specifically identifies North American and Australian cultures as possessing a highly permissive, casual relationship with spoken grammar.
Very casual.
The overarching cultural mandate is utility. Just get the idea across. No one in a functional, real-world environment is mentally grading your syntax with a red pen. The ego obsesses over the missing helping verb. The listener only cares about the core message.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we realize that the fear of imperfection is the single greatest isolating force.
It keeps people silent.
Individuals withdraw from interactions, they withhold their expertise in professional settings, and they avoid social integration purely to protect their ego from the perceived shame of a misplaced modifier.
It's tragic, really.
By exposing the reality that native speakers are consistently breaking these precise rules, the source dismantles the necessity of perfection, granting the learner permission to prioritize raw connection.
So we've dismantled the academic obsession with complex vocabulary. We recognize the biological reality of the stress response. We accept that spoken grammar is an inherently flawed, forgiving medium. The final piece of the puzzle is implementation.
Execution.
Right. If we are treating pronunciation as a gamified acting exercise to bypass our inhibitions, who exactly are we supposed to be acting like? Whose character are we playing? This brings us to the final, highly creative directive in the text, the curation of your vocal avatar.
This concept is generated by a viewer named Andres Escobar. He asks a deeply practical question. He wants to leverage the internet to find a vocal model for pronunciation practice, but he doesn't know how to select an appropriate target.
There are so many options.
The source's guidance here is steeped in psychological nuance. It explicitly advises against simply choosing a voice just because it is famous, or clear.
Yeah.
The mandate is to find a persona whose intrinsic energy, style, and psychological makeup align with your own baseline personality.
Match your vibe.
Yeah.
The host of the broadcast uses some phenomenal examples of cognitive dissonance to illustrate this. He points to Sylvester Stallone.
Rocky himself.
Right. Stallone is an undisputed cinematic icon, a historically successful writer, a global presence. But functionally, his vocal delivery is characterized by heavy slurring, mumbling, and a hypermasculine, gritty resonance.
It works for an action hero.
But if you are an introspective, mild-mannered data analyst and you select Sylvester Stallone as your phonetic template, the resulting output is going to be incredibly jarring when you try to order lunch.
The dissonance between the internal psychological reality of the speaker and the adopted external acoustic signature would create massive friction for the listener. They wouldn't know how to process you.
He also uses Clint Eastwood as an example. He references the iconic gravelly delivery of "go ahead and make my day."
Classic.
Again, brilliant for conveying cinematic intimidation. But it is an actively hostile vocal model for attempting to build rapport in a corporate boardroom or buying a coffee.
The underlying utility of the avatar concept is the establishment of a consistent phonetic and psychological template. By auditing public figures, industry leaders, journalists, authors, and selecting one who embodies the precise professional or social energy you wish to project, you create a cohesive framework for your output.
So what does this all mean? It means you are intentionally aligning your vibe. If your baseline is high-octane and intensely motivational, you might analyze the cadence and volume of someone like Tony Robbins.
High energy, lots of projection.
If your internal architecture is highly analytical, deliberate, and minimalist, you might adopt the precise pacing and calculated pausing of Steve Jobs. Or, if your goal is to project boundless enthusiasm and accessibility, you might even shadow the host of the source video himself, A.J. Hoagie.
And this completely bypasses the analytical paralysis of language generation. When an individual is preparing to speak, they no longer have to cognitively process what is the textbook tongue placement for this specific diphthong.
Which takes way too much time.
Right. Instead, they rely on a holistic, intuitive prompt. How would Steve Jobs deliver this sentence? It shifts the cognitive load from micromanaging phonetic rules to macro-level mimicry.
It is a profound shift in how we view language learning. It ceases to be an academic chore of memorizing data sets, and it transforms into a deliberate act of identity curation. You are actively engineering the version of yourself that will exist within this new linguistic framework.
It perfectly encapsulates the journey from an ego-driven fear of failure to a connection-driven expression of self.
As we bring this deep dive to a close, let's consolidate the structural shifts we've explored today. The primary directive for you, the listener, is to abandon the academic conditioning that equates complexity with intelligence.
Drop the noise.
That noise is an ego trap that fractures understanding. Your overarching mandate across every level of human interaction is to prioritize simple, direct, clear, and confident phrasing. Relegate your advanced labyrinthine vocabulary to your passive database, where recognition allows you to comprehend the density of the world around you without the burden of generating it yourself.
And we must reframe our approach to pronunciation. Standardized accents are not tools of cultural erasure. They are acoustic optimizations designed to maximize your global comprehensibility. Lower your effective filter by treating practice as character work.
And when this physiological panic inevitably strikes, when the amygdala hijacks the prefrontal cortex, do not fight a biological response with linguistic effort.
You can't outthink it.
Alter your physical state, adjust your posture, lower your resonance, and signal safety to your nervous system. Release the paralyzing fear of grammatical imperfection, understanding that spoken language is an ephemeral, forgiving medium where native speakers constantly break the rules in the pursuit of meaning. Finally, audit the landscape. Select an avatar whose resonance matches your internal architecture and utilize them as your phonetic template.
Before we conclude, the global footprint of the source material demands acknowledgement. The transcript references active participation from viewers situated in Rome, Nepal, Tajikistan, Brazil, Morocco, and Finland.
It's truly global.
It highlights a profound reality. Beneath the vast surface of our cultural and linguistic differences, the biological and psychological drive to be clearly understood to bypass the ego and achieve genuine connection is a fundamental, unifying human imperative.
We're all navigating the exact same friction, just trying to calibrate our signals so someone else can catch the transmission.
Which leads to a deeply provocative extrapolation for the future. We are currently standing on the precipice of an era defined by instantaneous, functionally flawless AI translation.
It's already happening.
In the near future, an individual will speak in their native tongue, and algorithmic hardware will instantaneously render their exact intent into any global language, deploying a perfectly synthesized standard accent. As the necessity for language acquisition as a mere transfer of data is entirely automated away, it forces us to reevaluate the act itself.
The physical act of speaking.
Will the grueling, imperfect physical effort of learning to speak a shared language become less about utility and entirely about the emotional vulnerability of choosing to share your unmediated, authentic voice with a stranger? Will the willingness to stumble through a simple, direct sentence become the ultimate human metric of respect?
That is an incredible paradigm shift to ponder. If the algorithm provides the perfection, then our biological, flawed, simple speech becomes a deliberate act of intimacy. We want to thank you for dedicating your time to this deep dive today. We hope these insights dismantle the pressure of perfection, and we strongly encourage you to carry this framework into your very next interaction. Command your posture, simplify your message, find your avatar, and prioritize the connection. Until next time.